very much, and I'm really pleased to be part of this gathering today, not only to speak about one of my favorite places in the province, but more importantly to learn from so many of the experts and citizens and stewards that are in this audience. So I'm going to go as quickly as I can, and I'm going to rely more on imagery than on words. But just before getting past that portrait of myself, I don't mean to point things at me, but I thought it was an important image to use because it's someone coming from Guelph, talking about Guelph, but the first image you saw was the heritage planner with two of the other churches in Guelph. Just raise your hand if you've been to Guelph. Ah, great, okay. So the Basilica of Our Lady, which is the church you see in the slide, or the image on the left, is really our biggest, tallest, highest, and most important icon on the top of the city. And it's been there almost forever. But I wanted to say right off the top, and I'm always pleased to be involved with talks that involve First Nations and Carolyn and Paul General and others that I work with in the Guelph and Wellington area. I want to establish, and I'll reiterate this in some of the other slides, that the Church of Our Lady or the preceding churches, they weren't the first things to occur in Guelph or be on top of the hill or be by the rivers. We have to understand that not just in Toronto we're on Mississauga's former territory, but in Guelph we are also on territory that has a lot to do with First Nations settlement, and they're very much part of the evolution of the sense of place. What I want to talk about very briefly today is how Guelph, we've had some experiences so far with cultural heritage landscapes, but I think we're at the cusp of just starting to identify them in truth. And also, we're just starting to contemplate ways of, after they're fully identified, finding the best way to conserve them. And as Wendy has reminded us, that there's a range of ways to do exactly that. I'm not just going to dwell on the history of the Church on the Hill, or Catholic Hill as it's known now. I'm going to also just mention briefly two other significant cultural heritage landscapes that Guelph is lucky to have. One of my favorite shots is of the former Guelph Reformatory that's on Highway 7 if you're going east out of the city. The GCC, as I might refer to it, or the jail lands, or those lands are still owned by the province of Ontario, and I'm pleased to say that the province, through the Ontario Heritage Trust, has already identified a large area of that property as a provincially significant cultural heritage landscape. Just to finish my introduction, I'll also just touch briefly on another very important mix of landscape, literally, the trees and grass and buildings and sense of place in Guelph, and that's known as the Homewood, which is a hospital, essentially. And it's, as I said, it's one of our significant places that we really need to get our heads around and understand so that we can protect properly. Okay, so hold on, we're going to go really fast here through the, I only got about 63 slides, so but my next time I give this talk, I'm going to present something at the very beginning that talks about the larger context, and I'm going to involve the Mississaugas of the New Credit, their former lands. I'm going to bring us a little bit more to the present day. When you think of Guelph, I want people to start thinking of Guelph just not on its own as a single-tier municipality, but as part of a larger area which I know and love as Wellington County. This is the visitor's map that you'll find on the county's website, and many would be pleased to see that Guelph isn't prominent in this, but it is part of it. So any cultural heritage landscape that I talk about in Guelph, there are connections, and there's actually parts of it that are really more part of the county than the city. And as you can see, the city is toward the south, and but it's nestled within, or it's that center point, or I've even heard it described as the timbit in the middle of the donut, the county donut. I'm not sure I'm going to keep using that that description, but I think it's important it reminds myself that we're not on our own, we're surrounded by other related cultural heritage landscape. So this is just a very basic picture of the city boundaries on the left, but as you'll see that we're drilling down here through layers and through maps, old maps and some of the newer maps, but mostly old ones. And as has been said very well in earlier speakers, cultural heritage landscapes are so much about those layers and understanding what came first or what's below what or how it actually looks all together like transparencies. I'm going to have to reread a quote in future that I think it was Margaret Atwood that talked about seeing history not as a timeline but more as something so deep that you look down through the depths. And you can start to see that development or evolution in what we lovingly call our annexation map. So I just thought this was an interesting juxtaposition about where we are today, but also how we got there since 1827. So if you see the tin bit at the middle of the city donut, that's where we're going next. So in 1827, John Galt designed a plan that's well known now today as an example of town planning, and it became what's now the core of the city of Guelph. But as I said, and I'll keep reiterating this, that Guelph the area didn't exist when Galt got there and discovered it. Many people already lived here, First Nations and others, and I wanted to find out more about that as the heritage planner. But what I want to keep focusing in on here and drilling down is what's at the very center of the slide, and that's what's known now as Catholic Hill. It's our most prominent cultural heritage landscape. So in 1827, if you know Guelph at all, you might see this as interesting because the lands given to Bishop MacDonnell and what became the Diocese of Hamilton is that open area right in the center, and you'll see that St. Patrick's Church was planned to be built there. So this map is 1827, and the first wood frame church on the top of the hill was built by 1832. You would have noticed in that map too that there's already that splendid axial view from the river, the confluence of the Speed and the Aramasa River, all the way up to MacDonnell Street to Catholic Hill. There's only one thing better than a map when you talk to me about heritage planning and heritage conservation. The only thing better is an old map. And I get really excited about registered plans at Guelph, and some of the other planners kind of look at me sideways. But you can learn so much from the history of, or at least historical planning as opposed to heritage planning. So register plan number 8 is really where a lot of everything got started. So that dates from 1855. And Cooper redrew his map of Guelph in 1877, and that's the color version you see here. So I won't point out literally, but you can see that already Catholic Hill is developing in its buildings. So it's not just a place now. It's not that prominent hill that you saw from the river at the base of MacDonnell Street. The major buildings are starting to appear. The church now, where the original church was burned down during the conflicts between Catholics and Protestants in Guelph by 1844. So John Turner designed a new church named St. Bartholomew in 1845. This is one of my favorite pictures. I'm sorry, I'm trying not to pop here, but this is one of my favorite images to show anyone interested in Guelph history or Wellington history. It dates from about 1869, and you can see St. Bartholomew's here, really at the center, driving things, so to speak, and out front are the two main buildings, a very substantial 4-story rectory building to the left of St. Bartholomew, and that's still there today as the rectory. To the right became the Loretto Convent, and has now been rehabilitated, to use the proper word, I hope, as the Guelph Civic Museum. On the very left is a small stone building known as the Annex Building. And I think it's important, and again, as Wendy has pointed out, that inventory of knowing all of the elements of a cultural heritage landscape is important, because the more people I talk to in Guelph, the more I realize no one knows about that fourth building. Now, and very few people know also that the hill was shared at one point by what was known as Central School, a very prominent building in itself that shared that hill. This is another image I use to explain to people that church buildings often are never finished, and this, even though what's now Basilica of Our Lady was begun in the late 1870s to replace St. Bartholomew, the towers still weren't done by the date of this picture. The towers were finished by the 1920s. So the evolution of any cultural heritage landscape, the fact that it does have things used to be there, things may still be there, but understanding that evolution is so important. St. Agnes School has appeared on the right, St. School for Girls, and the St. Stanislaus School has gone.
And I'm going to go really quickly through these pictures just to show you the buildings that are there. And
I'm not going to read out, and this isn't on the test that's in 15 minutes. I did want to show you that I am trying to learn how to use a GIS. And I'm going to talk with Mark Warwick about that, because Mississauga's done really great things with their GIS, so I think Guelph can be just as good. So the yellowish land here is what people understand as the Catholic Hill property. And I've identified those elements, those buildings within that area. The building itself is a National Historic Site, but one of the questions maybe we could have at another meeting or one of the roundtables would be, what does that mean when it's a National Historic Site? Does that offer protection, or is it really up to the municipality? Some things about Basilica of Our Lady are protected, the cultural heritage landscape, and that's the protected view corridors that our zoning bylaw protects. And if you looked over my right shoulder in the portrait that was put up there on the screen, the view from Aramasa Road over my shoulder toward the Basilica is actually protected in the bylaw, zoning bylaw. Nothing can be built up above a certain point. See this is one of the maps from the zoning bylaw, and you can see how that might work. So from the Aramasa Hill, that view, there's only certain heights that can be used to protect the view of the Basilica. The reason for this was the tall, what's called the tall building to the right of the church in 1975 was the reason why the bylaw was changed for it.
So I wanted just to point out, this is the jail lands here, and this cultural heritage landscape here is Catholic Hill. I'm interested in the study that Guelph is embarking on and its action plan to identify cultural heritage landscapes is to identify those CHLs, but also identify any relationships or views that are between those CHLs. You'll notice that some of the icons here are a circle with like a triangular view shed. So when you look, I'll show you a couple of those. This is the Turf Grass Institute, which is a building that's quite prominent on its own hill near the correctional facility. And it was designed by a Guelph architect in the 1980s, so that when you walk down the central corridor of the building, on the right, you can see there's an axial view of Basilica of Our Lady that was designed right into this design of the building. So always be aware of not only views of, but views to a cultural heritage landscape. Okay, we're just going to speed through here and show you the view of the Basilica from the jail lands. And here's the big... I'm sorry. Of course. I'm just going to turn the mic here so that I can just flip through quickly. The historical photos of the Guelph Correctional Center are really key in understanding what elements are still there and should be preserved. This is the view from the rock face looking toward the main gate. And this is one, again, like I said, one of my favorite views that we're using to try to identify but also conserve those elements that are still left of walls, water features, and elements that were built by inmates of the Guelph Correctional Reformatory. It was called a reformatory because they were made to, or they had options to learn how to build things like dry stone walls and other features. So the reality of today is that these lands are at a bit of a risk because Highway 7, or York Road, is being widened. And that whole process is having to understand how close or how much impact that the city can have on the cultural heritage landscape while still retaining those features. There are features here, like a waterfall. It's actually the Clyde Creek, which goes through this area. And what's been constructed here are water features which are pleasant to look at, but they also have a function with a stairway to the side. So again, the city's working hard to identify all these points on their GIS. And this is I'll just have to speed through these. The Homewood is another area that is important to try to understand. We have ERA architects working with us and with the property owner to understand the qualities of the cultural heritage landscape that are at the Homewood. So that, I'm hoping that might be something I'll be able to learn more about in today's discussions. And in closing, as you can see, I like using slides, but I'm oblivious to time constraints. But I just wanted to close with what I usually say to groups, that the cultural heritage value is often a key element in any planning decisions or planning preparation in Guelph. And I always welcome input when we're trying to understand cultural heritage landscapes, and that's from any of the time periods that Guelph needs to consider, right back to First Nations. And to close, I think it's really important to understand that true heritage conservation is a team sport. Thank you very much for your patience.